So I'm going to be just talking about UFO crash retrievals, and last year around about May, June, I went overseas to America and with a researcher called James Rigney and another group of individuals who are researching UFOs as well. And we decided to tour America, but I wanted to make that tour a UFO crash retrieval tour. But why the females wanted to go to sightseeing, us males wanted to actually go to these UFO retrieval sites. And so what we did is, actually before I talk about that, let's just do a bit of a debrief about what we're going to be talking about in UFO crash retrievals. Yeah, there it is, a UFO hitting the Capitol. Talk about, So alleged UFO crashes have occurred since 1897, which is the Aurora, Texas crash, which I went to on a separate occasion. Why do they crash? Is it radar that's involved, high-powered radar? Are there EMPs from atomic explosions or other reasons? And are they interdimensional, or are they nuts and bolts, or a combination of that? And if they're so advanced, why do they crash? I mean, I hear these questions time and time again. And crash retrievals are the holy grail of ufology because we've got physical evidence. So if we find physical evidence, we can test it and we can actually determine whether it's real or not. We've got something to go by. So where is the evidence? We sort of like know that there is evidence, but is it classified? And if it is classified, it must be extremely highly classified, probably under the Atomic Energy Act 1954, so where no one can actually access it because it's connected to the atomic explosion, the nuclear factor. So this is our map. This is a map of where we went, and it was a bit over 5,000 kilometres, quite a long way. So we started off in Indian Wells at the meeting that we had, which was called Contact in the Desert. Then we went to Area 51, which I went to before in 2003 with my wife. She wasn't very impressed. She's not a UFO person, but I thought, no, we've got to go there. We've got to, pull over and go down that way. So the first crash site we went to was Kingman. So anyone heard of the Kingman crash? No one. No one heard of the Kingman UFO crash? One person. Okay. So we went to, the next one was Aztec, and then we went to Socorro, we went to the Socorro landing, and then we went to Corona, which is commonly known as the Roswell Incident, and then we went to a place called San Agustin. When we were going to these remote areas, just a warning, if you want to do what we've done, there's a lot of rattlesnakes, a lot of tarantulas, very dry, very desolate, and very treacherous. So, as I said, Kingman is the first one we went to, Aztec was the second one, Socorro, Corona, which is Roswell, and then Aurora on a separate flight. So I actually went on a separate trip to Dallas. And when I got to Dallas, I did a talk at the International MUFON conference there on Havana syndrome. And also I asked someone who was a specialist, who was a researcher on the Aurora 1897 crash, and asked them whether they'd take us to the crash site, and they did, and we went there and had a look. And we went to San Agustin, and that was an unsuccessful trip because we got very close to the crash site, but we never actually got to the crash site. I can't talk about that, apparently. I've been silenced. So the Kingman, Arizona crash happened in May 18, 1953. So this has been in the spotlight recently, which I'll describe through Christopher Mellon. So allegedly 3 craft were involved on separate days. One of the craft landed with no damage, okay? And that's the one we commonly hear of when we're talking about Kingman. One crashed badly, and that's the one we went to. So over Phu Tank, there's a site where a UFO clipped a butte and then landed not far from a dam. They call it a dirt reservoir, which was, had water in it that was watering cattle at the time. That's the one we went to, and another one that caused a bushfire. So there was another crash of a UFO that caused a bushfire, and two strange men were put in custody that were thought to have been involved in the arson of the fire. They were incarcerated in the basement of the 1910 Kingman courthouse, and they disappeared. So they couldn't find any trace of them. So whether they were non-human intelligence or actual humans, we don't know. But that's the story. Anyway, so this is the guy that has done most of the research on Kingman, Harry Drew. Anyone heard of Harry Drew? No? Okay, Harry Drew was a resident of Arizona. He's an author and a historian, fairly credible UFO researcher. He's deceased, but he used to be the director and curator of the History Museum. And so most of you don't know what the Kingman crash is about, so I've got a video here which will explain most of it. How do I get that?
The story of the Kingman crash first surfaced publicly in 1973. 5 years before Jesse Marcel famously told Stanton Freeman he was a part of the Roswell cover-up in order to pose with fake wreckage comprised of balsa wood and aluminum foil while the crash disc was secretly whisked away. In 1973, UFO researcher Raymond Fowler revealed shocking statements made and sworn into affidavit by a Wright-Patterson Air Force Base engineer and USAF project engineer on Operation Upshot Knothole under the pseudonym Fritz Warner. And before we get into the story, what is this weird name Upshot Knothole? This was a series of 11 nuclear test shots conducted in early 1953 at the Nevada Proving Ground, orchestrated by none other than the Atomic Energy Commission. The objective of this project was to utilize tactical nuclear weapons to ready the U.S. military for atomic combat. These tests even oversaw nuclear payload shot out of artillery cannons. An estimated 18 to 21,000 DoD personnel participated in this program in 1953. Anyways, back to Warner. Let's hear his story. Warner stated to Fowler he was an engineer on USAF contract with the AEC for Operation Upshot Knothole. His job was to measure blast effects on various types of buildings constructed for the tests. On May 20th, 1953, Fitz spent most of the day at Frenchman Flat. Dr. Ed Dahl telephoned Warner that evening he would be doing a special job the following day. Joined by 15 other AEC specialists, Warner reported to Indian Springs Air Force Base. There, he was put on a plane to Phoenix with all of his valuables left in the custody of the military police and eventually placed on a bus with blacked out windows. During the 4-hour ride, an Air Force colonel told the personnel a super-secret Air Force vehicle had crashed and these specialists were sent in to investigate their specialty and theirs only. When he finally got off the bus, Fitz observed two agonizingly bright spotlights centered on a crashed object surrounded by guards. In Fitz's own words, quote, "The object was oval and looked like two deep saucers, one inverted upon the other. It was about 30 feet in diameter with convex surfaces, top and bottom. These surfaces were about 20 feet in diameter. Part of the object had sunk into the ground. It was constructed of a dull silver metal-like brushed aluminum. The metal was darker where the saucer's lips formed a rim, around which were what looked like slots. A curved open hatch door was located on the leading end and was vertically lowered. There was a light coming from inside, but it could have been installed by the Air Force," end quote. Werner's duty was to attempt to determine the angle from which the object impacted into the sand and how fast the vehicle was moving with forward and vertical velocities at the time. The craft had sunk roughly 20 inches into the sand and featured no landing gear and, shockingly, no damage. No marks or dents on the surface, not even scratches. Over time, Fitz estimated the craft had been traveling at roughly 1,200 miles per hour. And amazingly, Fitz claimed to glance at a guarded pitch tent, where lay the body of a dead pilot. It appeared to be a 4-foot-tall humanoid biologic with dark brown skin and a silvery, metallic-looking suit. Keep this pilot description in mind. After being interviewed on his crash velocity estimations over a tape recorder, Fitz managed to speak to someone who claimed to have glanced inside the craft and observed 2 swivel-like seats, as well as numerous strange and anomalous instruments and displays. Fitz finally returned to the bus and headed back to Phoenix. The Air Force colonel had all 16 AEC personnel swear an oath not to reveal their findings and were instructed to write their reports longhand and to not type or reproduce.
Okay, that might give you a bit of background about the Kingman crash. And so Arthur Stansel is a first-hand witness. He was at the crash site, so he was transported from an airbase to the crash site in a blacked out windows on a bus. So he was involved in the May 18 crash landing, so it wasn't an actual crash, it was a landing, sort of like a crash landing. He told the story to Raymond Fowler in 1973, 5 years before the Roswell story. Stansel was an engineer, right, Pat? Very credible witness, and he was commissioned by the AEC to estimate the speed and angle of entry of the craft. So just a bit of history behind this, a bit more. So Arthur Stansel was a first-hand witness. So in June the 7th, Raymond Fowler interviewed him. He claimed that to be an engineer that was tasked for the measurements to assess the actual momentum of the crash craft. I know that they did say it was 1,200 miles an hour, but if it was travelling at 1,200 miles an hour, it surely would have dug more deeper into the sand than 21 inches, which I think is an underestimate. But I think the speed that was quoted was incorrect in that video. Other researchers like Leonard Stringfield, Bill Newhouse, Wendell Stevenson, Harry Drew had looked into this. So how did Raymond Fowler get to know about the Kingman crash? Harry Drew traces back the story to a 15-year-old boy called Jeff Young, who actually wrote a UFO book for children. He actually interviewed Arthur Stansel. He was his neighbour. So Jeff had interviewed Arthur, and that's how his name got into the papers. Arthur Stansel's name got into the papers, and there it is. You can see here. So the media was interested in what Jeff was doing, writing a book about UFOs, and they decided to interview him, and he mentioned Arthur Stansel. So that's the first time we heard of Arthur Stansel in 1973. And Raymond Fowler did interview him in 73, so here's another video. I hope it doesn't go too long, because
From Wenham, a suburb of Boston, comes an eyewitness account which could explain this continued military fascination with flying saucers. Ray Fowler, one of the most respected civilian UFO investigators, is also author of 2 bestsellers in the field. Because of his stint in the Air Force Security Service, he finds himself still vulnerable to government pressure. Because of similar pressures in his own work, a friend of Ray's had kept quiet for 27 years with an amazing story. Ray tried to convince the friend to tell his story on In Search Of.
Well, it's been several days now, and I've been waiting for you to call me on this, but have you come to any conclusions?
The man finally agreed, for the first time, to talk, but only under strict conditions.
Now, I can assure you that your name will not be used.
They made up a name, Fritz, to protect the witness's true identity.
As I understand it, Fritz, you were working for the United States Air Force.
The story began late one night in 1953 at Frenchman's Flat, Nevada. The man had been working as a consultant on blast effects of atom bombs when he was suddenly ordered to report for a new mission.
What happened after that? We were put on a bus, which the windows were all completely covered with curtains and, in some cases, black paper taped to the windows. And we're driven for 3 or 4 hours, and we're not sure just where we were going. Several of us tried to guess where we might have been. We, at that time, came to the conclusion it was in the area of Kingman, Arizona.
After getting off the bus, as recreated here, the scientists were taken to an even more remote location. They had no idea exactly where they were or what they were about to see.
We were told that we had been selected for various technical specialties, and I was told that I was to ask any questions that had to do with dynamic loads and nothing more, and I wouldn't get any answers to any other question. It looked like two saucers, I would call it, one on top of the other, inverted, probably 25 to 30 feet in diameter. In terms of something known, what kind of metal would it look like? Well, it would look like a brushed aluminum. I'm sure it probably wasn't that. I say that because I noticed no scratch marks. And anything that would penetrate into the sand 20 inches that way would certainly have some scratch marks. No signs of buckling, fracture, or anything? Not that I could see. I accepted it was probably some United States government vehicle, a highly classified vehicle. In fact, we were told that that's what it was. Interestingly enough, one of the questions I needed to know was what the mass of the vehicle was. Well, I can tell a lot of things from the penetration into the desert sand and so forth, but I needed to know the mass. And they told me that they weren't going to let me know that. They perhaps didn't even know themselves. There was also a tent, which I didn't get to look into, but one fellow whom I did happen to talk with briefly until they told us to stop talking, said that he had seen two bodies inside this tent, two alien-looking bodies. It was brown, leathery skin, had a silver, like a cap on, without a bill.
Like a skull cap?
Yes, like a skull cap. I realized what this really started to mean, but I also at the same time realized probably why the government was keeping it classified. There are a lot of things that could be changed by our culture or religions. There are a lot of things that could be affected by the release of information like that at that particular time.
Like many other UFO stories, this also concludes with a recovered craft taken to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Cameras are normally prohibited there, but In Search Of was allowed to photograph certain declassified areas. We found there actually are huge freezing chambers inside the legendary Hangar 18.
My major criticism is that from way back in the 1947s, there should have been a gradual information release and had the public accustomed to what UFOs are, what we're trying to do about them. And instead, they've covered up so long that to admit that they've covered it up, it's almost like another Watergate. Plus the fact, I think they don't have the answers. And if they admitted even what they knew, people would want to know more answers. They don't have the answers to give them. I'm sure they don't have the answers to give them.
So by the way, Raymond Fowler's still alive. He's in his 90s, and he emailed me in 2020 about advertising his book on my website. So this is the type of vehicle that Arthur Stansel was transported in a General Motors 3301 bus with blacked out windows, and at the back of the bus there was a sign saying, notice, do not discuss classified information. But this is a video of Harry Drew, so don't worry, I'll get to my part where I've actually been on the crash site. I just got to get going through some historical stuff, and so that you get filled in with all the details. So a video of Harry Drew at the International Symposium in 2012 on the Kingman crash. So he's going to actually give you some background about what he's actually found in that sense.
I'll just push that again.
Here is a drawing that was executed by Raymond Fowler, the NICAP researcher, of the UFO as it was described by Arthur Stansel to him. And if you look at the line through this area, this is the sink depth of the craft, and the approximate dimensions given to it by Arthur Stansel were 30 feet in total diameter, with a slight elongation of the whole craft. And the portion that you might think of as like an area that could be occupied was 20 feet in diameter, and the whole craft 14 feet approximately thick and seamless, with the exception of along the outer lip, like two clamshells coming together. And then Stansel made reference to perimeter slots. He had no idea what they were. I have no idea. This was a classified device. The sink rate was due to the high porosity of the soil where it was sitting. The angle was caused because its flight stabilization system had been adversely affected by something that I'm going to show you now, or soon.
They took the craft up by a tank retriever. One of the reasons why they had to do that was because they could not tilt it like they wanted to be able to take it across the Boulder Dam, the road that was built at that time. And it was kind of narrow. So what they had to do is haul it like a house.
This was an M25 tank transporter. It was brought from one like, this is not the original. This is one that would have been brought from Camp Irwin, called Fort Irwin today. I've been out there many times. It's the United States Army National Training Center. Excellent command people there. And when I was there, they were switching over from A1 to the M2 Abrams full battle tank, which are impressive. And this particular vehicle, if you remove the trailer, which was used to take the saucer intact out of the area, you call the whole device an M25. If you remove the trailer, this part of the vehicle becomes an M19. And it's actually meant to pull tanks out of a ditch, a retriever. And so with Army efficiency, they gave names to even the whole unit being a 25 and part of it called a 19, if that were the case. Here we go. This goes back to checking newspapers all over the place to find out what's going on, to see if there was a Kingman crash. I want to tell you something right now. UFO crashes do not have to appear on the front page of the newspaper to have happened. They are top secret. When we have an F-117, the full stealth fighter, go down, and a couple of those went down, when it was clear the Air Force was busy in one place doing a recovery, the Air Force completely denied anything was going on. And not everything in intelligence is the same as it was in 1953, but that's pretty consistent. The real interesting thing is that this is May 22nd. On May 21st, Arthur Stansel went by bus and arrived at night at a UFO site where a UFO had landed. And what he was not aware of, or no one necessarily until the 22nd, was this little story right here. It's not quite so little. The sports editor for the Prescott Evening Courier and a former Army Air Force pilot who was contracted by the government and was training Air Force pilots at 3 airfields in Arizona were at a place with a man from Prescott, and they saw 8 UFOs. One on one side in a hover, one on another side hovering, and 6 in what the airmen described as doing dogfight maneuver 5 minutes away from where the Kingman UFO saucer was sitting. Now, speculation would make someone wonder why they would be doing what was described as dogfight maneuvers They did this for over an hour, and they were witnessed by these people, and that's how it got in the paper the following day of the 22nd of May, 1953.
Okay, I think that's over. So why did this craft crash? I think basically what Harry Drew had discovered is that they were very high-powered radar bases which were located in a strategic location around Kingman through a flight path, a UFO flight path that actually affected all three craft. And this is another small video which will explain that even though upshot knothole, which was the actual atomic explosion that were taking place at the time, it wasn't the EMP from upshot knothole explosions that actually caused these UFOs to crash.
Other rumors and stories. Atomic weapons, the tests that were going on in Nevada, the EMP, electromagnetic pulse, knocked down the UFOs at Kingman. And I'm here to tell you that did not happen. Upshot knothole Grable, which was the test firing of the only 280 millimeter nuclear cannon ever used, and used a 15 kiloton, typically close to Hiroshima-sized nuclear device, went off below 600 feet above the ground, 19 May, and it was called Test Grable. Every test had a name, and that's too low to the ground to overcome what's needed to send EMP effect across two mountain ranges that are on the way. And I'm going to skip to the next blast, upshot knothole Harry, which was a 32 kiloton detonation on May 25th. And they said one of these knocked it down. And I'm telling you that the first craft in Kingman that went down was on the 18th of May, not the 19th. If the EMP effect from a blast tower for a 32 kiloton bomb could have somehow sent EMP effect, it happened on the 25th of May, and the second craft went down 4 days later on the 22nd. We know it, and the old-timers know it in Kingman as the Red Lake crash. It is 19 miles north of 1953 Old Town Kingman. The other craft is 16 miles southeast of Old Town Kingman, but they were on different days than the bomb blast. Here's what brought down the UFO. Both of them. 3 overpowered radar systems. And my engineer did some outstanding calculations for me, and I'll explain. Early radar had a range of basically 25 miles. If you wanted 50 miles, you double the power. And because we were hard-pressed to have any kind of reliable long-range radar system in 1953 that was handy, we could use right then, they started boosting the power up to see what they can do. What happened in Kingman is one radar was set up in what is called Radar Hill in Old Town, 1953, 3,500 people. Old Town Kingman. Another one was set up to the east about 15 miles, and the third one was set north on the east side of Red Lake.
So, how did the craft get transported to Wright Field? At the time it was called Wright Field, but Wright Patterson now. It's 3,000 kilometres away, so it didn't go to Wright Field. There were two different schools of thought. it either went to Wright Pat or it went to Area 51. That was the one that actually landed, that didn't go into pieces. Don't forget there's 3 crashes. There's one over Red Lake, which is the one that we went to, also called Food Tank. There was one that landed, and there was one that also crashed and caused a bushfire. So it couldn't have gone to, as far as I'm concerned, it couldn't have gone to Wright Field. It's just, how do you transport, a massive UFO that far? Unless it was in a B-52, but I don't think it would accommodate it. So it probably went to Area 51. Problem with that is that Area 51 was not developed until 1955. So how do we get around that? Anyone got any ideas as to why they would have taken it to Area 51 if it wasn't developed? I mean, I can think that Area 51 was probably developed because that craft was already there. What do you reckon? They might have hidden it and then decided, okay, well, this is a good place to actually develop Area 51. So the Kingman craft could have actually been the reason why Area 51 was developed. And so, if you have a look at this map, there's Kingman down there. I'm not sure where the crash site is. It's probably a little bit out of Kingman, on Route 66 here. And then it'd have to be transported all the way across Hoover Dam. How do you get across Hoover Dam? I've been to Hoover Dam. It's pretty narrow across the dam wall. He said Boulder Dam. It was called Boulder Dam in the 50s. So how did they get it across? There's the dam wall. So I've been here. So there's the border between Arizona and, what's the other side, New Mexico? Yeah, Kingman, New Mexico. So basically they had to put it on a barge and get it across the Hoover Dam to the other side. But I've heard rumours that the actual barge or the chains on the barge had broken as it was going across, and it actually hit the dam wall. So the barge hit the dam wall and left a mark on it. And at the time, the actual water level was really low because it's a drought, but basically that mark should still be there. So that's proof. They should send divers down there. I want to go down there. So we went to Red Lake UFO crash, which is, the one that absolutely obliterated itself. But it's near what's called Food Tank. So Food Tank, as I said before, is just a dam, a watering dam, but it's been breached. The sides of it's been breached. So to get to Kingman, what we had to do, we stayed at Barstow overnight, and we drove all the way down through, I can't even see that, through Needles. Anyone heard of Needles? Anyone been down this way before in America? We went through Needles, which apparently there was another crash, alleged crash at Needles not so long ago, I'm thinking in the 80s or 90s. But we didn't go to that site. We went past Needles and we went through to Kingman, and there's our car. Somebody's written Area 51 on it. And we went through Route 66. Kingman's a really interesting town. It's got a lot of paraphernalia related to Route 66. There we are. That's James Rigney and myself working out how to get to this crash site. The crash sites are really hard to get to. You've got to actually plan it. You've got to know where you're going. You've really got to, and not only that, not only the planning stage, but also getting there is a real deal, because a lot of these places are remote, and as I mentioned before, they're dangerous to get to. So what we had to work out is how to get to Food Tank, and most of it's dirt road and a lot of it's not labelled. So the conventional way was to go behind this butte here, this is called Rock Butte, and traverse Rock Butte. In other words, walk over it, but it's quite an ordeal. But we worked out there was a path, which is a dirt path, that sometimes is traversable, sometimes is not, according to the weather, whether it's flooded or not. Luckily it was dry, and we took the detour off there and ended up in Food Tank. So on the way to Food Tank, also called the Red Lake UFO crash of north of Kingman. so we had to go on Route 66. So we took a left-hand turn on Stockton Hill Road, about 20 miles out from Kingman. Ended up near the butte that apparently the UFO had clipped, and it's near a small dried up reservoir called Food Tank. Found a dirt track that led to the side of the butte and to Food Tank instead of having to scale. And Food Tank is a dam which was breached, has a breached wall. I don't know when the breach wall, when the dam wall was busted, but it's been there. It looks like it's happened decades ago. Like I'm talking about, at least 50 years ago. Very dry, many rattlesnake holes in the ground. I don't know whether they're inhabited by rattlesnakes or tarantulas. Some of them are bigger, some of them are smaller. So it was a bit scary. And this is a little clip of us going there. I've got another little clip, but just...
Yes. So we're on Stockton Hill Road now, and we're heading off to the Kingman alleged UFO crash site, and it's about half an hour away. And when we get there, we're gonna fly a drone over this. No, we're not. Unfortunately, we don't have a drone. We're thinking of having a drone, getting a drone, but it might involve a bit of trekking and a bit of working out exactly where this crash site is. There's a few crash sites, alleged crash sites, but we're going to go to the one near Food Tank.
Oops, sorry. Oh, sorry, that I have to stop. I shouldn't have stopped it. Sorry.
So we're on Stockton Hill Road now, and we're heading off to the Kingman alleged UFO crash site, and it's about half an hour away. And when we get there, we're gonna fly a drone over this site. No, we're not. Unfortunately, we don't have a drone. We're thinking of having a drone, getting a drone, but it might involve a bit of trekking and a bit of working out exactly where this crash site is. There's a few crash sites, alleged crash sites, but we're going to go to the one near Food Tank. Maybe pan around a bit. That's it. Perfect. Get on the side as well. Getting closer to the Kingman crash site now. We're getting closer now to the Kingman crash site. As you can see, we're approaching the mountains here. Very dry, very desolate. We just turned off to the Calalachero cut-off road here, and we're on the trail now to the Kingman crash site. And we should be there shortly.
And rolling.
So we're just turning here at Mountain Mesa Terrace, and this is the road that leads to, I believe, Food Tank. Just pan around a bit. Let's see on the other side. And cut. So down in that valley below is where allegedly 3 UFOs crashed, but we're really concerned about the one which was confirmed by a researcher by the name of Harry Drew, and we're getting close to it now, but it's just down in that valley there.
Cut.
There's a mountain drop in the background. It's getting closer. I'm not sure where Food Tank is, but we're getting close. And so here we're turning off onto the off the beaten track, and this is the path that takes you to Food Tank. got a car up ahead of us. We've got our friends James Rigney in the car ahead of us. And as you can see...
Okay, so I've got more footage. But before I do show that to you, I just want to show you where food tank is. So there's the butte. You can't really see the dam there. It's not a high enough resolution. And there's another butte here. So this one's important. There's something over here which I saw. Don't expect me to find a UFO or metallic fragments because it's not going to happen. So this is the group. I'm taking that photograph, so James Rigney and these ladies here, Joy, Katrina and Irene are from, I forgot the organisation now, sorry, Close Encounters Australia, sorry, and that's me with them. There's me and another video, so we're on site and I'm just going to...
So here we are at Food Tank, and we can see that this is an old dam that used to water cattle, and it's got the break in it here in the wall. You can see it here as I zoom in. So this is definitely the site of one of the alleged crash sites of the Kingman UFO crash in 1953. I've got James Rigney with me and a few other people that have come along with us to this crash site.
Okay. So there's the breached wall of the dam. Just took a photograph of that. That's been there for ages. There's never been water there. It looks like it hasn't rained for over at least a decade, possibly longer. It's unbelievable how dry that place is. Another photo. Oh, sorry, it's a video.
So here we are on top of the dam wall. You see a lot of erosion here, and so there's a clearing here. There's a grey area out there near the base of that mesa there, which is the alleged crash site of Kingman. I'm just going to turn around and have a look at the mesa where the actual craft had flown over. There it is there. Some say that it hit the side of the mesa. Not quite sure about that.
Can everybody hear that? Yep.
There's our two vehicles in the distance. Great to be here. Amazing crash site. Very desolate area, very dry. Very desolate area, very dry. See, there's been no rain here for ages.
Okay, so just to explain to you what happened. So you can see my little arrow there. That's where the alleged UFO had hit the butte. So this is a UFO that was travelling through that flight path where the radar is located. It must have been affected by the high-powered radar, clipped the butte and ended up in this spot here, right next to this butte. And there's food tank just there. Got better photos, I think. So UFO had allegedly hit the right-hand side of the butte and landed a short distance away. The information was gleaned from UFO researcher Harry Drew, and he got that from Wendell Stevens. So that information came from Wendell Stevens. Recently, Christopher Mellon believes that the Kingman UFO crash was real from a signal message that he got from someone high up in, I suppose, in the DoD. So we found something unusual at Food Tank, and don't get your hopes too high, because as I said before, we haven't, the craft was taken ages ago, the pieces were taken ages ago. But let's look at this video.
So here we are on the, probably the area that we think it might have, the vehicle might have landed on, crashed on. We can see here there's a bit of a difference between down here where there's no rock, and over here we've got some black rock. I'm not sure whether it's basalt or whatever, but as you can see,
I've cracked it. Rog, come and look at this. See, looks like a sedimentary rock, possibly.
It could be sedimentary rock. It's not basalt, is it? Or
No.
not sure.
Look how burnt. Hang on, it is on this other side.
On the other side, yeah.
Oops.
Yeah.
Yep.
Very black, and it's very hard.
Black, and there's a lot of black on all these rocks on the other surface. It doesn't seem to be any dark residue.
Is it sedimentary?
Not sure whether that's related to some fire or whether it's related to the alleged crash. I have no idea. So it was interesting that this is a little distance away, about 0.2 of a mile from the food tank, that reservoir, and we found these rocks out of place. They're usually just on the buttes, high up, but there's a pile of rocks there and they've got black residue on them. So I didn't know what was going on, but so we saw an area of about 500 metres away from the west of the butte. It appeared to have black igneous rock. Rock was blackened on one side. It appears as if something was spilt on it. The area was approximately 30 to 50 square metres, I estimated. So no other rocks in the area. And Harry Drew actually explains why we found those rocks there. Allegedly, what had happened is that the UFO had clipped the butte. It did a ricochet and really ploughed into the ground so hard that it actually pulled these rocks up from the ground. It was that the implosion was that intense, which explains those rocks being in that location and being covered in some sort of residue. Are you going to explain it or not? What's going on? It doesn't seem to be... Okay, well, we might skip that because we're running out of time. I've explained it to you anyway. So Harry Drew on location. So basically I'm going to have to speed this up a little bit, but he actually investigated the landed craft and this other one, but I might skip through that. But what he did find at the site of the UFO that had landed, so that was the one that Arthur Stanson was involved in on May 18th, 1953. So he found some tin cans there which were used by the military to store sterilised milk in, so you can mix it with coffee, cereal, etc. And he thought that was unusual because they actually dated between 1951 and 1952, which means that there was military action in there, in that site where the UFO had landed. So they would have set up camp and then actually, took them a while to actually get this craft loaded on the M26 or whatever flatbed truck that they took it to Area 51 in. So he thought that was quite significant, and basically these tins have little lead beads on them on the very top, which you can see here. I've labelled it. That's very, very specific for those types of tin cans in that time period. Yeah, they're very rare. They actually sell them on eBay if you want to buy them. What also has come up is, anyone heard of J-Rod? Yeah. J-Rod. So he came from Kingman, the Kingman crash, apparently. And Bill Newhouse speaks of him, and so does Dan Baresh, who is actually a scientist, so he's a microbiologist. So let's have a look at this quick video. I hope it's quick. About J-Rod.
J-Rod was one of the crash survivors and worked directly with our own government.
Captain Bill Newhouse, a former Navy pilot who later worked for the U.S. Air Force performing experimental testing on aircraft, was assigned to Area 51 in the mid-1960s. And he claims that he not only studied the craft that allegedly crashed in Kingman, Arizona, but also had direct contact with J-Rod.
We had a long period of introduction into meetings, as an alien. And I called him J-Rod. That's the name that the linguist gave him. And he would talk, but he'd sound just like, if you spoke, he'd sound like you. You know, he's like one of these, you know, a parrot, you know, but he'd try and answer your question, you know. Basically, it was only engineering advice or science advice.
There's also another whistleblower by the name of Dan Burish. And Dan Burish said that he was hired as a microbiologist to basically care for J-Rod, ensuring that he remained healthy. And this went on for years and years and years.
According to Dan Burish and Bill Uhouse, J-Rod was housed in a special underground chamber at Area 51. And there have been numerous other accounts of extraterrestrials working with the United States government.
There's a lot of stories that we've worked with the aliens at Area 51, or some say at a base nearby, kind of in the desert out there. And we've been working with them in underground labs, and they have been sharing information.
Okay, so as I said before, Christopher Mellon. Anyone heard of Christopher Mellon? He was, yeah. So he got involved in a bit of a well, not a skirmish. You can see my comments there on X. So what happened is that there was a bit of a controversy over whether David Grush had actually gone to Arrow or resisted going to Arrow, and basically what happened is John Greenwald had actually been given some signal messages from Arrow from Chris Mellon, that he had a conversation with someone else over David Grush's refusal to go to Arrow. But Dave Grush was actually getting all his checks and balances together with DARPA and, another organisation, I forgot what it's called. But he was getting that information together, so he wasn't resisting. Anyway, there was a big hoo-ha about it on X, and what happened is that after this, Chris had found the post on X, and he was a bit shocked about it, but you know, he said, "Oh well, fair enough. If you're going to release my signal messages, I'm going to release something about something that I know that no one else knows." So he released his signal messages about the Kingman crash, and so this is, I think it's probably an email that was sent by Chris, and it says basically that, I'll just read it. So redacted, somebody and I are making huge progress getting the crash retrieval program. He plans to meet with you at some point. The something would be slack-jawed if they found out what we know now about Kingman. Right now we haven't gone that far back, but we're dealing with the recovered UAP landed in Kingman, Arizona in the 50s. We're vacuuming up all the information. We now know that the management structure and security control systems of ownership of crash retrievals. So we also know that who recovered, and we also know who recovers landed crash retrieval UAPs under what authorities. We also know that it's still a highly classified memorandum by the United States Air Force Secretary. So that's a big deal, which really sort of like legitimizes the Kingman crash to a great deal. So inconsistencies, as I said before, there's always some sort of controversy with these crash sites. It's not all positive, there's some negative aspects, and as I said before, Area 51 wasn't developed, but we can, you know, like there's arguments against taking a craft over to something that hasn't been developed yet. Possible explanation of Area 51 was even before the hangars were there, they could have hidden it in a remote area, put it temporary in storage, and then built the whole kit and caboodle later on. Was Area 51 developed because of the craft? I mentioned that before. Arthur Stancil said he used astral travel. See, when Arthur Stancil was interviewed by Raymond Fowler, he went into astral travel and meeting aliens and all blah, blah, blah. So a lot of people didn't look upon that very favourably. Bit controversial. He also said that he drank a few martinis before he was interviewed by Jeff Young. Okay, so that's it for Kingman. So just 10-minute question time. Anyone wants to ask any questions before I go on to the next topic? Yes.
What breached the dam? That had nothing to do with the craft?
No, it didn't, because the craft didn't actually land in the tank. So what it did, it clipped the actual butte, and then it ricocheted, and Harry Drew makes a point of it that it did not land in the tank, in food tank, although some people were saying that that's what breached the wall, but that's actually not the case. Yeah. Hi. Oh.
From the little sketch there, it was half a meter, 20 inches
Yep.
deep on the ground.
Yep.
For me, it just doesn't look right. If it hit, it must bounce again and maybe 2 bounces or 3 by the end to have only that
Yep.
that little. So that's what my feeling.
Yep. Are you an engineer or?
Yes,
Sort of. I thought so. Yeah, that makes sense. Like if it was coming down, why would it just sort of like, you know, embed itself on an angle? Yeah. We don't know whether the craft skipped or anything like that, but that's a valid point. And I don't know why, but they were saying it was travelling at 1,200 miles an hour, and that is wrong. There's no way it would have been travelling at 1,200 miles an hour and sink.
Aeroplanes are not going that fast.
Yeah, and sink into like 20 inches into the sand. It's not going to happen. It's going to actually be obliterated if it hits the ground. So there's some misinformation. Harry Drew corrected that and said it wasn't travelling anywhere near that speed when it actually landed. It could have actually, like, the way they had it pitched like that may not be entirely correct. Like it could have just, you know, skid a bit and then, you know, gone on the side. But there could be an explanation. Any other questions?
Yeah, hi. You mentioned that the high-powered radar and how it brought down the craft. Do you have any information on how, like more details about that, like what kind of frequencies or I don't know, like how
Yep.
how it works?
Are there 2 microphones? No. Oh, there's only 1 microphone. Okay, so basically I don't have that information, but as Harry was saying, you know, like you can project radar out to a certain distance and you can double it, and it's not known because I think it's classified as well. Like there were radar stations at in the Aztec crash, which I'm going to talk about now, in Moriarty and other 2 other locations which were not known. They were secret. They were not even known. They weren't known to be have been developed in that time. So sorry, I don't have the answer to that.
I don't really have a question, but I do have some substantiating evidence to support what you're saying.
Thank you.
Which you may want to comment on. When I was visiting Roger Lear in 2005, Thousand Oaks, he actually had a piece of the Roswell crash, which he worked with Robert Bigelow and a professor at UCSD to see what it was, and it was dope silicon. That's where we got the transistor from.
Right.
So he actually had that piece. He wouldn't show it to me, but Robert Bigelow knows. And the guy at Stanford, who's that guy at Stanford? He knows all about it. So we
Garry Nolan. Garry Nolan.
Gary knows.
Yeah.
We got all of our semiconductors from the Roswell crash, 100%.
Wow.
And the one he did was a neutron-rich silicon. I saw the data, and they wouldn't report. Roger told me they wouldn't report what he and the astronaut fellow was saying. Well,
Edgar Mitchell.
Edgar. He and Edgar were talking. The news people wouldn't tell everybody that we got all of our. And Gary Nolan knows, of course, as well. The second bit of substantiating evidence, you can see why they keep it secret, very valuable, is I was visiting Roger in 2005 in Thousand Oaks, and he was at a medical clinic there. He's a skin doctor. And there was a young woman there who does a biofeedback. Her name was Georgia. I don't want to mention her last name, like a ballerina, a blonde woman, about 40 or 50. And she had all this biofeedback stuff. So I said, well, you got all this equipment. I'm here for a day. Let me just try it on, synchronizing the left and the right half of the brain. I'm going to go in there and just try it, see what happens, right? And so I went in with her for a while and built her trust. And afterwards, we started talking about telepathy. Because I'm sort of a believer in telepathy. I've done it a few times, but I'm not very good at it. And I was a bit uncertain about it. So after she trusted me, she said there's a secret she didn't want to tell anybody because she might get in trouble on the street. And apparently when she was a student of a professor in Ohio State, there was a professor there in bio or whatever, you know? And he had been the one selected by the U.S. military to talk to J-Rod, bringing it, just like they brought these guys in, not Burrish, they brought this guy from Ohio State, a professor, to communicate with the alien. It was underground in New Mexico, somewhere, I didn't know, in the 1950s, that's all I know. So they brought this professor in, 100%, and how did my good-looking ballerina friend figure it out? Well, of course, she had an affair with the older professor, and older men, when they're a little less proficient at sexual things, will tell the young woman something to impress them, or reveal secrets like John Kennedy did with Marilyn Monroe as well. So she heard the whole story about how the professor had talked to aliens, and then I tried to do a little telepathy with her unsuccessfully, but there was no doubt she was afraid somebody would attack her if she let the story out. There was no doubt they brought this guy, a professor from Ohio State, she wouldn't tell me her name, in to talk to the alien underground in New Mexico. That's all I could get out of it. Well, I would say that's hearsay, but very...
What year was that?
In the 1950s.
No. When you were there in Silicon Valley?
2005. Roger passed away some years later.
Yeah.
But that was she was total convinced. It's hearsay evidence, but she was afraid to tell anybody. They said that they might come after me. So she slept with this guy, and he, of course, as the older man, younger woman, tell a few things to impress her in bed. I'm sure everybody can understand that.
Thank you, Horace. It's very interesting, and I'm glad that there is further evidence to substantiate this. So we're going to have a break at 2:30, and I'm not going to get through this next talk, I don't think. So, oh, sorry. Yeah. Yeah.
Just to add to the gentleman down the end there, would it possibly be scalar technology that's talked about?
I don't know whether they developed scalar technology in those days, did they?
I don't think they want us to know that they've really still got that. But I believe.
So you think it might have been secretive, classified, but yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. I cannot disregard that hypothesis either. So as I said, I will probably. Oh, sorry. Is another question? Other question? No.
Can I ask?
Yep.
So, are there a lot of visitors to these crash sites? I mean, I'm just wondering.
No, we were the first Australians there. I'm absolutely sure at Kingman. So a lot of people don't go there. They don't know about it. You'd have to be obsessed with ufology like me to go there. Kingman, Aztec is very difficult to get to. San Agustin is impossible to get to. A lot of people have not been at these crash sites. So is it all right to proceed? Yep. So the next crash site is Aztec. Oh, what happened there? Oh, do you want to call it up?
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's the second slide, right?
Yep, second one. So as I said before, we may not get through this by 2:30. We'll still break. Is that all right, Marie? Yep. So Aztec. Anyone heard of Aztec? Oh, fantastic. One person. 2 people? 3 people? Great. 4, 5? Great. Thank you. 1948. So there's a lot of controversy over this one, unfortunately. Controversial report of a flying saucer landing and crashing in Hart Canyon in 1948, and it's a very convoluted story, which I had to get my head around it, and it's very difficult, very confusing, involving con men. Okay, so the saucer was allegedly 100 feet in diameter and came apart in 3 pieces. Another thing to be, skeptical about. Research by Scott and Susan Ramsey. I've spoken to them. They're really good researchers. They spent an absolute fortune in researching this topic. Frank Scully, everyone's heard of Frank Scully, I'm sure. Reporter. So he was the first to have reported the crash. Scully was a highly credible reporter at the time. Anyone heard of Dorothy Kilgallen? Everyone must have heard of Dorothy. She was an amazing reporter. So basically, he was of the calibre of Dorothy Kilgallen at the time, so we couldn't dismiss the report from him coming from someone like that. So here's a video of, just to give you some, and the people that don't know about this crash, some background about the Aztec crash. You can make your own mind about it. Carl Flock, he's deceased now, but he was a skeptic about the Aztec crash, is talking. So we're getting 2 arguments. We're getting Scott Ramsey talking about The pros and the cons can't flock. I don't know how long this is, but I might cut it short if we're running out of time.
This is the small town of Aztec, New Mexico, located about 2.5 hours northwest of Albuquerque, depending upon how fast you drive along the often deserted highway. It's close to the Four Corners area, that geographic landmark where the states of Utah, Arizona, Colorado, and New Mexico intersect one another. Like most places, it has a story to tell. With Aztec, however, that story goes far beyond the norm. You might even say that the Aztec story is truly out of this world.
Timeline of Aztec would be a report from the oil field workers a little after 5 a.m. on March 25th, 1948. Basically, the first report came in as a large brush fire on a mesa off of Park Canyon Road. As the oil field workers got out there, they discovered a large disc, approximately 100 feet in diameter, sitting on top of a mesa. That had nothing to do with the brush fire, but because of the oil drip tanks out there at that time, people from El Paso Oil Company were notified that they should get out there to investigate the fire and any subsequent danger it could pose. Upon getting out there, they noticed a large disc on the mesa. Military showed up later that day, late lunchtime, early afternoon. The one local law enforcement officer had warned the locals that the military would be there eventually, that they had been notified.
The Aztec is a fascinating case because it was the original, if you will, crash flying saucer story. And it surfaced at first in 1949 in columns written by Frank Scully in the Daily Variety. It ultimately led to a best-selling book that Scully wrote, and I think it sold something on the order of 60,000 copies in 1950 in hardcover, and then went on to 12 editions overseas, and on and on and on. I mean, it was remarkable how successful it was. It's obvious he struck some kind of real chord. It was also total nonsense, and Scully was either one of these fellows who knew enough not to ask questions he didn't want to hear the answers to, or he was genuinely duped by a fellow named Silas Newton and a sidekick of his named Leo Gebauer, who became known as Dr. G in Scully's book.
In Frank Scully's book, Behind the Flying Saucers, which came out in 1950, he tells the Aztec story as told to him by Silas Newton and Leo Gebauer. Silas Newton and Leo Gebauer then introduced Frank Scully to at least 8 scientists that allegedly worked on the Aztec crash. Frank Scully took these 8 people and molded them into one Dr. G. The skeptics like to attack the story if they haven't researched it and say that Dr. G was Leo Gebauer. Leo Gebauer was no more a scientist than anybody. He was an electrical engineer that worked with Silas Newton. More of a glorified electrician more than an electrical engineer. Frank Scully in his book plainly states that Dr. G is up to 8 scientists that worked on the recovered UFO at Aztec.
Essentially, these 2 guys were conmen who were in the process of trying to peddle a doodlebug, which is an oil and gas industry tag for a device that will find oil and gas, but of course it doesn't. And in his case, it was a machine that not only found oil and gas, but gold and water and pretty much anything that the mark was interested in finding. And on top of that, Gebauer had invented something similar, which also supposedly could assess the health of a person. So this was sort of an all-in-one, do-it-all kind of thing. But what they did, which was unusual and made their little bit unique, was that they claimed that their doodlebug was better than anybody else's because it was using technology that had been taken from the flying saucer that allegedly crashed near Aztec. And therefore, obviously, it was far superior. Dr. G, our friend Gebauer, was supposedly a magnetics expert who was one of those called in by the Air Force when the saucer was tracked to ground near Aztec, where it floated to ground, not actually crashed, and presumably disabled by a high-powered radar somewhere nearby. Such was the claim. Anyhow, the whole thing was a total con job. And it was quickly recognized as such and then really exposed in detail in 1952 by J.P. Kahn, who was an investigative reporter. I think he originally was with the San Francisco Examiner, if I'm not mistaken. And he did a 4 or 5 month investigation in detail, including managing to con the con man out of an example or a sample of the mysterious metal that the saucer was made out of. It turned out to be the sort of stuff that you make pots and pans out of, actually. But, you know, he was a very, very, very sharp reporter who did a really good job. And True Magazine published his article in 1952 exposing these guys. And this led to the district attorney in Denver, Colorado, prosecuting Newton and Gebauer for fraud and various other sorts of associated charges. Anyway, they were convicted in December of 1952. And basically the whole notion of crash flying saucers went away. And people who take flying saucers, UFOs, seriously for decades wouldn't touch anything like that with a 10-foot pole until Roswell came along.
I think where some of the skeptics attack the Aztec story is why would 1, 2, or up to 8 scientists confide with Frank Scully? And that's an important question. But you have to look at who Frank Scully was back then. You have to look at how the media operated back then. We didn't have CNN, we didn't have National Network TV. You had a very tight group of journalists, the Dorothy Kilgallons, the Walter Winchell's, the Frank Scullys that, quite frankly, were the most credible people of their day in journalism. And that would probably be an automatic person that you would go to break a story like that. The other thing, you read Frank Scully's writings, the scientists that approached him did not think that was going to be a secret for a long time. They thought that story would break within a year. They're giving Frank Scully a little advance on the Aztec incident.
The first UFO-related documentary I made was a biography of legendary Roswell investigator Stanton T. Friedman. If the Aztec incident has a Friedman, that is to say, someone with respected professional credentials who has chosen to undertake a search for the truth about the UFO phenomenon, it is this man, Scott Ramsey, a successful businessman from North Carolina. Frank Scully might have broken the Aztec story, but it is Ramsey who has rescued the tale from obscurity and who has challenged, after years of research, the long-held view that the whole thing was simply a hoax.
In looking at the story, that was one thing that intrigued me, was looking at the claims made back in 1950 by these 8 scientists. And one was the secret radar bases. So as we started to look into the claims that Dr. G was telling Frank Scully, and we compared to what we know now, when you go back 50-some years later and look at what we've been able to get declassified from the Air Force, the Atomic Energy Commission, somebody back then was definitely in the loop leaking good information to Frank Scully. It took us over, 50 years now of getting records declassified to back up the claims that they were making in 1950. One was the infamous radar bases, the top secret radar bases that were located in New Mexico. We went out searching for them in 1999 using topographic maps on if we were to put a radar base in New Mexico, where would we put it based on height, direction, location. And out of dumb luck, quite frankly, we found the first one near Alabama, which is about, I guess air miles, probably 40 or 50 miles north of Los Alamos. We went to the Air Force, Maxwell Air Force Base down in Montgomery, Alabama, and asked for the records on these. At the same time, the state of New Mexico was doing a historical research on anything that had anything to do with the Cold War. So this became a perfect fit. We went down to kind of a dual purpose. They released the records, but we had a problem. The Air Force bases under the radar bases under the Air Force didn't exist till 1950. Well, we couldn't tie that to Aztec because Aztec, of course, was 1948. Looking at the records in great detail, we saw things like the first quarterly report for their capital expenditures. They needed a roof
They needed a water heater. They needed some improvements in electrical work, mainly some transformers. And we asked ourselves a question: if this base was just built, why would they be needing to requisition a water heater, a new roof on a building, and new transformers? So we went back and we did some digging, and it turned out that the radar bases were built in 1946.
Okay, so what he's saying there is that the radar bases were already there in 1946, where there's no records of them being there because they're under the Atomic Energy Commission. So those radar bases were there, and that's, again, like Kingman, we've got radar, high-powered radar that could have possibly taken these craft down. This is a reconstruction of the actual vehicle by Michael Schratt, who's a UFO investigator as well. And there were some oil workers. So the oil workers, there was a fire, if you remember. There was a fire around that area, and on one of the mesas, they incidentally found this massive craft on the mesa. So they climbed up, and then they looked through the porthole. So these oil workers got there before anyone else did. So oil workers attended to brush fire off the mesa off Hart Canyon Road, and in the early hours of the morning, they incidentally discovered the craft. Now, this is the part that I find difficult to believe, but apparently there was a hole in the actual portal of the craft that was around about the size of a quarter, which is, I don't know how big a quarter is, about that big. And then they got a pole, pushed it down the hole, and managed to switch something on in the craft which actually opened the dome up. Sounds a bit fanciful, but that's actually what happened, apparently. And then they found dead aliens inside the craft. So it landed, it didn't crash, but why they did. So there were about 16 of them in blue jumpsuits, and there was some hieroglyphic writing on the actual insides of the craft. They had a monitor, and there's the guy looking inside. It's all reconstructed, of course. So summary, Frank Scully was informed about the crash by Silas Newton and Leo Getbauer, and they apparently were con men. You know, they had this doodle bug which they said could find oil and whatever, which was wrong, you know, but that doesn't necessarily detract from the real story. You know, you can have a criminal say something, and then basically, if it's, you know, some other story behind what they were saying could be real. I don't know what I'm talking about, but anyway. Frank Scully was introduced to 8 scientists, so there is proof that he was contacted by 8 scientists. Frank Scully was introduced. I've already written that down. So Newton and Getbauer made a contraption, called the doodle bug, which was a load of rubbish. And there's an article about it there in Flying Saucers, Mysteries and Little Men. So that's the actual report by J.P. Kahn, and refuting what happened with Getbauer and Silas Newton, telling the story to Frank Scully. So as a result of the publication, they were convicted, just because of J.P. Kahn's publication. So declassified documents from the Atomic Energy Commission of the United States Air Force, garnered by Scott Ramsey, have now shown that there was high-powered, top-secret radar there in '46, because they're saying if you look up if you look up these documents online, it says there was no radar there since up till 1950. So if the crash happened in '48, how did the radar, how does the radar factor into it? Because it's 2 years later. But they found out that they were there in '46, so we could use that as an explanation as to why they were downed, why it was down, sorry. So Scott Ramsey looks at radar facilities. So this is Scott Ramsey, and I know I'm running out of time, but I'll try and speed this up. So I actually won't play this video, but he actually goes to the actual radar stations. They're dilapidated now. There's no one there. So you can look at that online. So don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. is what I always say. You can be skeptical to a certain degree about these things, but you know, like just because there were two con men involved in this, it doesn't necessarily mean the story can be totally thrown out. UFO researcher Nick Redfern and Stan Friedman bring up some interesting facts about, and I'll skip past that. But what they're saying in that video is that there is evidence that Silas Newton and Get Bauer were actually heavily involved in this surveillance by the secret services. So there is evidence to suggest that even though they were peddling this doodlebug and they were con men, they were steeped in connections with the intelligence community. So the long and winding road, I'll skip that as well and go to our journey to Aztec. So again, we had to get a map out, and this was really hard to find. Boy, we got lost because it's just dirt tracks. So we started off at the visitor center in Aztec, and we went up US 550, turned off at CR 2770, which is a road which is sort of like paved, but then it goes into a dirt track, and because there's oil fields all around there in that area in Hart Canyon, basically they don't label them, and they're just convoluting, winding roads that lead to practically nowhere. This is some of the photos that I took. You can see an oil station there, dirt road. So I took an aerial shot, a screenshot on my computer, and you can see, so we travel down this road and then we take a left-hand turn, but we kept on going and got lost and had to double back. And there is, once we got onto this road, we went up here and we went further up, but we should have stopped here. So we got lost again. But this is an area here where you can park your car, and the crash site is here. And you can't see it very well. No. Okay, I'll go to the next one. So, can anyone see the crash site here? There's a little clue. Anyone have a look at that? What can you see?
Face.
A face, yeah. There it is there. A little alien head. It's made out of rocks. So, this is where we parked our car, where the yellow star is. This is where there's an actual, because I skipped all those videos, Scott mentions a concrete slab that they found in a very unusual place. There's no reason to have a concrete slab there. And apparently that concrete slab was used to actually put one of the foots of a crane there that stretched all the way to the crash site. But that's a little bit of so there's the alien head. I measured it, so from the actual slab, you can see down here, that is 20 metres, that little line. I measured it, so, and that's about 200 metres, long way. So I researched, and there were no cranes in those days that could reach that far. So if that concrete slab was used as a footing for one of the cranes, they would have had to have had a tandem crane. So you have two cranes, one here in the middle here, and then another one at the end there. So you'd have to have tandem cranes for that to be actually what happened. There's the alien head. UFO crash site, so March 48, oil workers are sent. I've already gone through this. So
we've just got off Hart Canyon Road, and this is the actual parking area where you can park your vehicle, and there's the alien trail just here, which you can see where you have to go down to actually get to the crash site, the Aztec crash site, alleged Aztec crash site. We're about to just go down that trail now.
Lost again. So we got lost actually getting there on the car, and got lost actually on the trail. So we had to backtrack. and I found the cement slab eventually, so I needed to turn left at the fence. So once you see that fence, turn left if you ever go there. So we went straight ahead for 1 kilometre and couldn't find, we got to another road, so we had to backtrack, then followed the fence down, and I'm going to, maybe, how am I going for time? Just a few more minutes, so I'm going to have to skip.
So we've got Mystery Road, and over here,
so there's a mystery road there.
Cement block, concrete pad. No, let's go take a look at that then. Very good. Tell me the story behind the mystery slab of concrete.
Well, it really makes no sense why it's even here. It's on the average 9.5 inches thick. Did a core sample right at about a year ago. What we're trying to establish is how old the slab is.
Sure.
Does it fit into the time frame of 1948? We've got rebar heavily fortified, 9.5 inches thick, rebar all through it.
Okay, so here we are at the concrete slab. I found it, and these are stone cans that somebody's put together.
Here I am at the slab. I found the concrete slab, and a couple of people have put some stone cans here, which is just a pile of rocks just to signify where the stone slab is. It was just, the fence is up there and the gate's just up there, and you had to turn left, go down this trail, and the plaque is probably further down south. I've just made a cairn. Here is my cairn here. That one there. Just made it on the slab, cement slab, that the alleged crane was on as a support to lift the craft of the alleged Aztec crash.
So what I did some EMF measurements, not EMF, but in microtesla. So I had a little app on my phone, and I did some testing of magnetic radiation coming from the slab.
Hang on. And we're rolling.
Got a reading of 61 here, quite high.
So the 61 microtesla is a little bit
63,
above
64,
background.
65, 66, 67.
So we're getting a bit of a reading.
Above background readings here.
Wish I'd sucked my gut in. Yeah, so there's a bit of a background reading, a bit above background reading on the slab.
So this is the core sample that was taken from the actual slab. Cement slab that maintained the crane.
So unexplainable cleared area.
Okay, so you can see here there's a cleared area. I haven't measured it, but a 100-foot craft could actually land here, crash here. Allegedly 16 dead aliens found on this craft. As you can see, the pines are okay over here. We've got one little one here which looks like it's been crushed. Don't know how old it is, difficult to age it, but you can see how people have arranged these stones around here. So this is the actual site, alleged site where the craft had crashed. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Is that going to work or not?
We found the plaque as well. There's an actual plaque that was, or a lectern that was created by Scott and Susan Ramsey that commemorates the site. Junipers. So there were no junipers growing in there, and I found one that was absolutely contorted.
I'm just trying to work out whether there was any vegetation that was damaged here. You can see that this pine has been, I'm not sure whether it's
call it a pine, it's actually a juniper.
A bristle cone,
It's not a bristle
but
cone.
it has been twisted rather severely. I'm not sure if you look around.
So everything else
most
around
of the
is not
pines are
damaged except this one fairly large
see, I don't
juniper
know how old they
that
are.
seems to be in that
Seven,
area where the
1948
craft had landed.
allegedly. There's a clearing here.
So what I did, just to hurry along, I actually asked AI, I said, look, I've uploaded a photograph of a damaged juniper, and the question was, do you believe something landed on this tree? And so ChatGPT had analysed it, says, yes, something landed or impacted this tree. This is according to ChatGPT, which is not perfect. You know, AI is not perfect at the moment, but it tends to think that something had landed on that tree. And that's it for any questions before we go for a break, or shall we ask questions after the break? Yep. After the break, okay, so any questions? This next crash site, surely everyone's heard of Roswell. Anyone not heard of Roswell, put your hand up. What? Oh, you're BS artist, okay. Sorry, I mean that in a nice way. So Roswell, the Roswell crash. Now, I don't call it the Roswell crash because it didn't happen in Roswell. Anyone know that? Happened in Corona. Happened in Corona, which is not Roswell. It's 75 miles northeast or west of Roswell. Sorry, northwest of Roswell. So everyone's familiar with this newspaper article about when Roswell happened. But notice it says RAAF captures flying saucer, not we've found debris on a field that might have come from a flying saucer. Correct? Yeah. So not many people pick up on that. So they actually did find a object. So I got involved in Roswell, and I hate to say this, it's going to date me, in 1987. So the very first thing I did was I was on a train. I was doing a course on electron microscopy at Sydney TAFE. I'd already finished my degree. I hadn't done my PhD yet, but I was sitting on the train. I found this newspaper, and I thought, oh, I'll just read this newspaper. And there's this tiny little article that mentions mentions a crashed craft, in this book, and they referred to Roswell. So I thought, I've got to get this book because I've been looking at UFOs for quite some time, but I wasn't familiar with this crash site. So I got this book by Timothy Good called Above Top Secret. Anyone got that book? Yeah, a few people. Great book. I got that in 1988. And what I did, I immediately went to the references, the appendix at the back, and I flicked through it and I found the Eisenhower briefing document. Okay. What I did, I photocopied it and I typed a letter to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in 1987 or 88, I'm not quite sure which year it was, but it was around about there, and sent them the letter with the document stating, what on earth is this? I didn't say UFO, nothing referring to UFO, and I got a letter back from the Public Relations Office of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base within 2 weeks. So a knee-jerk reaction. They probably hadn't seen it before, I don't know. Stating that we don't look at UFOs anymore, but I never, they obviously read the document because I didn't reference UFOs. Now this is a really long video, and so I'm going to cut it short, but since most of you people know what the Roswell Incident's about, let's just have a look at a few minutes just to recap.
In the summer of 1947, the whole of America was gripped by a wave of sightings of flying saucers. In Roswell, there were many witnesses to a strange light in the sky. On the Foster Ranch, 75 miles northwest of Roswell, Mac Brazel, a farmhand, was on his daily rounds when he came across some strange material scattered in the fields. His sheep refused to go near it. Unable to identify what it was, Brazel travelled 20 miles to show his nearest neighbour what he had found. Loretta Proctor is 83 and still lives on the same ranch near Corona, north of Roswell. She remembers Brazel arriving on horseback with a collection of strange material.
He showed us this
piece that looked like plastic or wood of some kind, and he said that there was some metallic looking stuff that when you crushed it, it just straightened right back out. It wouldn't, wouldn't stay crushed. And there was some beams or something that he said had kind of pinkish purple printing on it. Well, we told him it's probably a UFO and he should report it.
Brazel took her advice and travelled into Roswell town with the strange debris. He reported his find to the sheriff of Chavez County. Sheriff George Wilcox immediately notified the local airbase. Roswell Army Airfield was home to the 509, America's elite bomb group which had dropped the atomic bomb on Japan. As the only atomic bomb squadron in the world, it was surrounded by the highest levels of security and secrecy. The 509's air intelligence officer was Major Jesse Marcel. He was assigned to investigate the material that the rancher had brought in. Marcel drove out to Brazel's ranch to collect some of the debris. That night, he brought it back to his house to show his wife and son.
He came back real late one night, about 2 o'clock in the morning, as I recall, very excited because he woke myself, my mother up saying they found parts of a UFO or a flying saucer at that time. And he wanted me to see it because it was such an unusual type of finding.
Dr. Jesse Marcel Jr. is himself a pilot, colonel, and state surgeon in Montana's Air Force Reserve. In 1947, he was 12 years old, but he vividly remembers the extraordinary nature of the material he saw that night in Roswell.
As I recall, the most unusual part of the debris that I saw was the I-beam fragments, or what I recall as being I-beam, because they were very light, very strong, and they had some writing along the inside surface of it. And that was the thing that really set this apart from anything I'd ever seen before.
Dan Dwyer and his colleagues in the Roswell Fire Brigade were also involved. The firemen were showing some remarkable material with curious properties. Dwyer's daughter Frankie was in the station at the time and remembers picking it up.
When I wadded up, it was like I had nothing in my hand. I couldn't feel it touching my skin. It was real weird. Drop it on the table and it was just like water, where it spread out.
Meanwhile, Major Marcel brought the material he'd recovered back to Roswell Army Airfield. The commanding officer, Colonel Butch Blanchard, surprisingly ordered his public information officer, First Lieutenant Walter Hort, to issue an astonishing statement to the press.
I was instructed by Colonel Blanchard to put out a press release which in effect stated that we had in our possession a flying saucer. In essence, it said that we have in our possession a flying disc. It was picked up on a ranch, and I can't remember if I said northwest of Roswell, brought into town by Mac Brazel, a ranch foreman, and the material was flown to higher headquarters, 8th Air Force, General Ramey.
It was an announcement that stunned the world. The London Daily Telegraph reported that although no details were given of the craft, the Air Force claimed that it was of a flimsy construction, like a box kite. A small town in America had become the center of the world's attention.
There was a tremendous amount of excitement because here I am, a little country editor in a small city in New Mexico, talking to Paris and Rome and London and Tokyo, and I can't remember all of them. Spent the whole afternoon on the phone. And I know that my counterparts at the other Roswell paper and probably at the radio stations did the same. But there was a lot of excitement.
America was transfixed. Radio networks issued hourly bulletins. This is an actual broadcast of the time.
July 8, 1947.
The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army. Army officers say the missile, found sometime last week, has been inspected at Roswell, New Mexico, and sent to Wright Field, Ohio, for further inspection. Russia has demanded UN action to get over...
Major Marcel had flown samples of the material to Fort Worth, Texas, headquarters of the 8th Air Force. Here, the story would take a remarkable turn. General Roger Ramey, the commanding officer there, called a press conference in his office. In front of photographers, he invited Major Marcel to display the material he had brought from Roswell. The base duty weather officer was also ordered to attend so that he could give his verdict to the press as to precisely what Marcel was holding in his hands.
And the general called and said, "Get your ass over here to my office. We got something here we want you to look at." And aye, sir. And he says, "If you've got a car, fine. If you haven't, get one. Get the first means of transportation and get over to my office." And when I saw that, I said, "Is that your flying saucer?" And they said, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, hell no. That's a Raven target and balloon. And if it isn't," I said, "I'd eat it without salt or pepper. I know what that is." "Are you sure?" "Yes, I'm sure. I know what that is."
This is what I would like to show you. And here, this is the photograph of the debris that was seen in General Ramey's office at Roswell Air Force Base in Fort Worth, Texas. This is my father holding up what is very obviously parts of radar target with balloon debris. In here, you see balsa wood fragments. You have actually parts of the balloon envelope in of itself, and you have what looks like paperback metal foil. And to emphasize this, this is not what was seen on the floor of our kitchen that evening or that late, early morning hours in 1947. This is totally different.
The implication is that Major Marcel may have been ordered to take part in a cover-up that involved switching the material from Roswell for a common weather balloon. General Ramey and the Air Force now discounted their earlier press announcements that they had found a flying saucer. The story was officially dead. But back in Roswell, those who had reported the original story found that the military were behaving somewhat strangely over what they now claimed was merely a weather balloon. Frank Joyce had been the first to announce the original news of the flying saucer at local radio station KGFL just a few hours earlier.
I got a phone call. Well, I got a number of phone calls, but the one that really got my attention was purportedly from the Pentagon. There was a young lady on the line saying, "Colonel so-and-so, this is the Pentagon calling." And this was within a few minutes of it going out on the wire. And the voice on the line says, "Who is this?" I tell him. He said, "You put that story on the air about the flying saucers?" And I mean, his voice was, you know, the type that really conveys menace and power. And I said, "Yes, I did." And he says, "You're going to get in a lot of trouble for this," or made some threatening comment. And I said, "Look, I'm a civilian. You can't talk to me this way. You can't treat me this way. You can't tell me what to do in stories I put on the air." And he says, "I'll show you what I can do." And bang, hung up the phone.
And the voice at the other end of the line showed exactly the power that he had to the owner of the radio station.
I got a call from Washington from one of the offices of one of the senators saying, "Look, if you put out any stories on this thing, you're going to lose your license. And it's not going to be over a period of time. It's going to be the same day that we tell you that you're off the air."
Frankie Rowe, the fireman's daughter who had handled some material, had always regarded the Air Force in Roswell as friends of the town. But an unexpected visit from the military to her home would now cast the Air Force in a sinister new light.
He had this club, or stick, or whatever it was, and he was beating it on his hand. And he would hit it. Every time he would say something, he'd hit his hand. And he said, "I want you to know you were never there." And I didn't understand what he meant. So I said, "Yes, I was." And he said, "No, you weren't." I said, "Yes, I was." And he said, "Can't you get this through your head? You never saw anything. You were not there. You don't know anything. And he said, you know, this is a big desert out here. We can just take you out in the middle of this desert and no one will ever find your bodies. He said, you'll be nothing but bones and nobody will ever know what happened to you. And I told him I would not talk about it.
If it were not for the threats, the entire Roswell affair could be viewed as nothing more than an embarrassing mistake. But in 1965, Butch Blanchard, now a four-star general, attended a reunion dinner in Roswell, and the incident had not been forgotten.
He had been the commander here in 1947, and I was at a table with the general and several other locals when they were interrogating him about the 1947 incident. And he declined to answer any of the questions, except he did comment that it was the damnedest thing he'd ever seen.
He never would discuss it, but several months later, one night, I badgered him again, as I like to do, and he said, well, and he paused, he said, I'll tell you this, and I'm paraphrasing him because I don't remember exactly how he said it, but in essence he said, what I saw I've never seen before.
For 30 years, the Roswell Incident remained a dark secret. Town and military maintained an uneasy silence. The story didn't see the light of day until 1978, when Jesse Marcel, a 509's intelligence officer, went public with an appearance on American television.
I was amazed at what I saw. The amount of debris that was scattered over such an area. It took me a while to realize that there's something strange about it. But the more I saw the fragments, the more I realized that it wasn't anything that I was acquainted with. I tried to burn it, it wouldn't burn. And I tried to break it, it would not break. If it was something of ours, I'm sure there would be no reason to keep it under cover that long. It's an aerial spacecraft. There's another reason why it would not ever be owned by anybody here until they found out more about it. I sense that there was a cover-up someplace about this whole matter.
In 1947, General Ramey's chief of staff was Colonel Thomas DuBose. Shortly before he died, he was interviewed on home video. As a retired brigadier general, he is the highest-ranking officer ever to comment on the Roswell incident.
Cover story. The balloon fire. It is the story that's to be given to the press, and that is it, and anything else, forget it. And McMullen, if you ever knew him, if you told him that he wanted to run something, he got damn sure ran it. He knew every facet of the operation. He's a busybody. He wanted to know what the hell was going on, who was just on the sidewalk, and all that sort of thing.
General McMullen, the deputy head of Strategic Air Command at the Pentagon, was in charge of the entire operation, according to General DuBose.
McMullen told me, you are not to discuss this, and this is a point of which this is more than top secret, as he said. Beyond that, it's within my priority as deputy to George Kennedy, and he in turn responsible to the president. This is the highest priority you can exist, and you will say nothing. And that's the commander-in-chief, and he forgot about it.
The revelations of DuBose suggest that the American Air Force did indeed have something important to hide.
Okay, so I thought I'd cut that short, but it was a very interesting BBC documentary, and it gives you a really good introduction into, or reintroduction into the Roswell incident, because it's going to be relevant for what I'm talking about. So just a little, so we went to Roswell first, obviously the town, before we went to Corona. And we had a look around Roswell, paid respects to Mac Brazel's final resting place in Tularosa. We went to Jesse Marcel's former house and kitchen. We're actually allowed in by the current owner, and we went to the Ballard Funeral Home where Glenn Dennis was there and was asked about the child-sized coffins, and inspected Hangar 84. We couldn't go in, obviously no one's allowed to go in Hangar 84. Visited several other buildings and drove to Corona to inspect the debris field. There am I at Mac Brazel. So he's the guy that actually found the debris. He's actually buried in Tularosa, which is not, I don't know how far away it is from Roswell, but it's probably 50 kilometres or something like that from Roswell. We went to the museum and notice it says the 3rd of July. So a lot of controversy over which day this happened. Some people say the 2nd, some people say that it happened in June the 14th, which is a ridiculous date. It happened on June the 3rd, allegedly. And I took a photograph of this Perspex box, and you can see here there's little metal fragments that they found and other things. That was in the museum, and that was picked up off the debris field by Frank Kimber, I believe, who's a researcher. So we've got metal fragments that they're still picking up, the yellow arrow. That was a metal fatigue button that was found of the military on site, so that's significant as well, although the military's... What would the military be doing in Corona? You know, it's not Roswell. And also there's a bit of Bakelite-like plastic fragment. That was all in that Perspex box. And I saw a screw that was loose. I thought, oh, that's interesting. And guess what? Somebody came in and stole all the fragments. A couple of weeks after I'd taken that photograph, and it wasn't me. And also, I was involved in a talk at Dallas, Texas about Havana syndrome, and I was given a piece of metal fragment, not a metal fragment, but a fragment of an apparent UAP that was given to me that I flew over to Australia to get analysed recently, and you'll hear about that later on. But the initial fragments came from Russia, so there's a guy in Russia that was actually said he'd seen a UFO and said that he'd seen an entity, and then all of a sudden all these pieces of black substance were appearing in his house, apporting. Do you know what apporting means? It means it just materialises. Substances disappear and materialise. So he sent some fragments to the United States to get analysed, and guess what happened? They got sent by normal post. When they got to the post, someone had turned the cameras around and broke into the MUFON mailbox and stole those fragments as well. Some interesting artwork. And this is Hangar 84.
Hangar 84 in Roswell, Mexico. This is where the craft and bodies were taken. We thought they were taken to Fort Worth, Texas.
And that's looking inside. I can't actually make that one. There's a video, but I put the camera against the door to Hangar 84, but I couldn't see anything. It's just a little reception area. But in Hangar 84, they had a room called the grey room. Well, people think it was the blue room, but it's actually the grey room. I think the blue room could be right, Pat. Where the actual bodies were kept for an examination or an autopsy. Initially, they were actually not in Hangar 84. Excuse me. When they took them from the Corona site, they actually took them to the Roswell Base Hospital, which is the Army Hospital, which is nearby Hangar 84. But then Glenn Dennis, I don't know whether you know the story, the mortician actually saw a nurse in that hospital who said, "You've got to get out. You know, they're doing this autopsy that I don't know what creature it is." Since that incident happened, they moved the bodies to Hangar 84. There I am at the Jesse Marcel's former house, and as I said before,
this is Jesse Marcel's house, old house, now in new hands. The streets of Roswell.
What street is this called? West 7 at the front of the house. But this is the house where the material was bought from the Corona debris field, and this is Jesse Marcel Sr. So he was head of the 509th Bomb Division, or one of the heads of the 509th Bomb Division that blew up Hiroshima and Nagasaki. He got that material, collected it, took it to his, well, not just a small portion of that material, took it to his house, and then laid it on the kitchen floor where his son, called his son and his wife, and they inspected it there in that kitchen, that very famous kitchen. There it is there. I was actually allowed in. What happened, the dogs of the occupant, there's only one female, we shouldn't say too much about that for privacy reasons, but basically there was a lady there with two little dogs, and they started barking because they could see me going like this outside, and what happened is she saw me, and I said, I'd like to give you some $20 to just maintain the house and the painting and whatever, and she let us through. So I was allowed in the kitchen, and this is the kitchen. Jesse Marcel's house, where the debris was kept, or displayed on the kitchen floor. And here is the kitchen, the infamous kitchen where the material was placed on the floor here with Jesse Marcel Jr. to look at, and an extension at the back. Sorry. I had to cut it short because someone was actually calling my name. But the kitchen cupboards are original, so everything else has been renovated, and they did an extension to the house at the back there. There's the Ballard Funeral Home where Glenn Dennis was working in and asked about the child-size hermetically sealed coffins. Here we are at the Ballard Funeral Home where Glenn Dennis was asked to, allegedly asked to obtain child-life coffins that were hermetically sealed for the occupants of the Roswell crash craft. This is the KGFL radio station where Frank Joyce had received the call from Mac Brazel about the UFO crash. This is in the 40s, and that's what it looks like. It's a cleaning service now. They've renovated it, unfortunately. This is KGFL where Frank Joyce received the phone call from Mac Brazel about the debris. This is the fire station at Frankie Road. That lady that was interviewed that said that there was a policeman with a baton threatening her, that they'd put her body in the, bury her body in the desert. That's where her father worked. Which has been renovated. That Frankie Road's father was a fireman in. And this is the house of Bill Blanchard, the commander of the 509th Bomb Division. So he was he instigated the press release about the Roswell crash. I'll just go through that. That's where this is a vacant block. So this is where the Army Base Hospital used to be, but it's been torn down. So here we are at the vacant block where the RAAF hospital used to be. So that's where the bodies were kept initially when they were transported to Roswell, and then transported back to Hangar 84. And this is us going. So once we did our rounds in Roswell, we then headed off to Corona, and as I said, it's 75 miles northwest of Roswell, and it's quite a long drive, 75 miles off the beaten track road. There's nothing out there. It was so dry when we were there, and very, very hot. When we got there, the gate was closed and it said trespassers be prosecuted. Okay, so I flew all the way from Australia to only find this. But we waited there for about half an hour, and we saw someone come along in a truck, and we hailed them down, and we said, "Is it right if we can ask the current owner, because this is the Foster Ranch, the former Foster Ranch, can we go in?" because we saw someone else with another car in there, and they said, yeah, sure, go along. It's just that basically people don't leave the gate closed. They don't close the gate when they open it, and the cattle get through. So he allowed us to go through. So the crash site's about a kilometre away from that gate. You've got to keep walking and walking and walking. When we got out, I was stung by these sweat bees, and I don't know, they call them sweat bees, but here we are on the track on the dirt road to the Roswell debris field, and this is not the site. This is just so this is what everyone thinks is the actual Corona debris field site. It's not. They used to have a massive stone can, which is that thing there, and they had a plaque. It's all been demolished. I don't know who did it. Maybe the farmer did it. He wasn't pleased with it being there, but it's now all gone. And there's the pile of rubble that was from that can, that rock can. And this is me on the close to the debris field, I think. At the Roswell Incident, the lighthouse, sorry, the windmill is over that way. And as you can see here, this is where a mile along here, this is the actual debris field where it all happened. Military coming in, picking up all the debris. There's the back there. Also, I have a water bottle that you can see here, which was actually given to me by the current owner of Jesse Marcel's house. Quite ironic that I was let through that house. Very nice lady let me go through the house to the kitchen. Here I am. I'll just cut that short. And then I said that I will, lie down in a starburst or whatever posture if I get there, and also kiss the ground. And I haven't got the photo of me kissing the ground, but they took that photo of me. And there's a cow pat there that I just missed. But yeah, it was great to be there. But it was a really hot day, and I thought, hurry up and take that bloody photograph. Information about the Roswell Incident, not often discussed. Where was the craft? And anyone know, can I just ask the audience, does anyone know where the craft went? Because everyone talks about the debris field, right? We all know about the debris field, but does anyone know of it? And just out of personal interest, does anyone know where the craft was from the Roswell debris field?
Go to Area 51.
Where it crashed. So basically the debris field was on the Foster Ranch, but where did the craft end up? Like where was it? Yep.
I think it ended up in a ravine.
In a ravine, but how far away from the debris field? See, not many people know. Not many people know. But
25 k's or 25 miles away?
Yeah, which direction? South-southeast, 27 kilometres. Yeah, about that. Not many people know about that, but there was a Netflix series on recently where this is just me.
Is that maximum? Oh, do you want me to turn it back? Or?
If it was just whether the little wire was there, the need for the security in the first place. From that point on, the evolution of the case is very complex. The debris field was just metallic debris. So there had been a search for an impact site where the craft itself supposedly came down.
Witnesses told us that back in 1947,
a team of archaeologists from Western Texas Tech came upon this pod, this egg-shaped craft about the size of a Volkswagen Beetle. So, this particular site is separated by about 27 miles, going east-southeast from the debris field. We believe this was the final impact point. And then we learned this.
Okay, so that is the first time I heard of that. Since 1987, I've been looking at the Roswell Incident, and I've communicated with Stan Friedman. I'd never heard that before. So that's really interesting that they actually mention that site. And of course the Air Force came up with their fact versus fiction, New Mexico, in the New Mexico desert, and as Stan Friedman said, most of the fiction was supplied by the Air Force. So they said it wasn't a weather balloon, so they changed their mind. First of all, the Air Force said it was a UFO, a flying saucer that crashed. Then they changed it. They said, immediately, it's a weather balloon, it wasn't a flying saucer. Then in 1995, anyone remember 1995, where the Air Force made another flip, where they just said basically it wasn't a weather balloon, it was a Mogul spy balloon. Well, what a load of rubbish! What a load of rubbish that was. So they keep changing their minds about what this was. Which is suspicious. And my 2 cents worth about Roswell is that if the crash was really a Mogul balloon, why was there so much fuss about it? Yeah, okay, it was a spy balloon. It was classified as top secret, but is that enough to actually threaten people with their lives? Rubbish. There's no way.
And they wouldn't tell you anyway.
No.
If it was a spy balloon, top secret, they wouldn't tell you.
Yeah. If the Air Force was concerned about disclosing the wreckage of the Mogul balloon, why didn't they track it? For God's sake, if they're worried about someone finding this, threatening people's lives, they'd never tracked it. This is all my 2 cents worth. The threats to civilians were over the top, death threats over a spy balloon, baloney. So what I did an AI, I asked AI the question again about Project Mogul, and I said, what classification was it? Yes, it was above top secret. And then I asked it, was it enough to threaten people? And I can't read that, but it says, would a top secret level have justified death threats to civilians? And it said, while the project was classified top secret due to the sensitive nature during the early Cold War, the available information does not indicate that such extreme measures would be taken place. So why were those death threats made? Over a Mogul balloon? No. Jesse Marcel was very familiar with what a Mogul balloon was. How could he have mistaken it for a UFO? Ridiculous. Material was found on the debris field was not consistent with a neoprene balloon, because all a Mogul balloon is a lot of neoprene and radar reflectors. There's nothing special about a Mogul balloon. Okay, it's just a train of different balloons and radar reflectors. So too many witnesses and stories that have been collaborated to be a misunderstanding. Why would there be 200 odd witnesses that sort of like collaborated with this story? Were they all wrong? David Rudiak, who was a researcher, said that the trajectory of the Mogul balloon, so the balloon that they actually released that was supposed to have caused the debris on that field was Flight 4, but that was cancelled due to weather conditions. So they said, okay, what could have caused it? Which flight could have been, which flight could have caused this crash? And as you can see, these are the records of which Mogul balloon was let off when. So we've got number 1 to 5. So when they don't record the flights, it means that they've been cancelled. So there's 1 and 5. So where's 2, 3, and 4? They're all cancelled. So possible scenarios. What brought down the actual craft? Was it? Now I've read so many books on Roswell that it's not even funny. But I do remember, and I read these in the 80s and 90s, so my memory is really very, very weak on this, and I haven't read a book on Roswell for quite some time. But I do remember someone saying that it was a lightning strike. I don't think so. I don't think it's a lightning strike. I mean, planes get hit by lightning, and they have the Faraday effect, where basically they don't, you know, the lightning just rolls off the plane and it doesn't affect it. So I doubt that a UFO would be brought down by a lightning strike. What about a malfunction on board causing a blowout? I've heard of that as well. What you've got to consider is that there is a debris field. So if a UFO is flying over and all of a sudden there's an incident where some of that craft ends up on the ground and it continues, how does that happen? How does that happen? So if it's a malfunction on board causing a blowout and then you get your debris field, I really don't think that that is likely a story, but it has been put forward as a hypothesis. 3, the craft was brought down by radar. Again, you know, the radar pops up. Possibly, but you know, where's the evidence? But my most likely theory, and I agreed with Stan Friedman on this, is that 2 craft collided. 2 craft actually collided, and what, you know, like, I mean, okay, we have plane crashes, we have planes that collide, and it sounds stupid that, you know, two craft would have, of superior technology would have crashed, but that's really the only hypothesis that fits. So 2 craft crashing and causing a debris field with both of the material from both craft, not just one craft, but a bit of material from one craft, bit of material from the other craft. So where did the other UFO go? If there were 2 involved and they crashed, one ended up 75 kilometres southeast near Roswell. The other one ended up, anyone know where the other one ended up?
I've read that the one crashed in Corona.
Yeah, one crashed in Corona, but what did the other one go?
Well, I've heard that there were 2 different sites. One was
Yeah, that's a theory. That's a theory. Anyone know the other theory? There's a theory that it ended up in a place called San Agustin. Anyone heard of San Agustin? I read this when I was a teenager. The very first thing, I think one of the very first books I ever read was this topic, Lonnie Zamora, and his sighting. So it's not a crash, it's a landing. Pretty crash landing, I suppose. The one that got away because they didn't get the craft.
Socorro, New Mexico is the kind of small town people are usually traveling through on their way to someplace else. Visitors rarely slow down long enough to learn that this place has a mysterious past, and that one retired Socorro police officer is still haunted by the unearthly encounter that took place here 32 years ago. Lonnie Zamora remembers April 24th, 1964. He was a rookie on the force, returning to the station after an uneventful day. Then, a speeding vehicle passed Zamora's patrol car, and he set off in pursuit.
When we got to this hill, I saw a lot of dust, and I let the speeder go, and I turned to investigate. I could see a white object sitting between those two bushes over there, and I had to come real slow because this was a messed up road, had big rocks on it and everything. I thought it was the kids from high school. They were racing up here, and maybe one of the teenagers had turned over.
When the speeding object came to a stop, Zamora claims that he saw 2 figures in white coveralls emerge from a strange white UFO. He moved in slowly.
I came up here on this road till I could find a flat spot where I could park my car. I got out the car and glanced down to the arroyo there, and I saw this white-looking object. It was sort of a big egg shape, bigger than a car. Those are the exact bushes that were there, and the craft was sitting right in between them two. So I started down to see what it was, and then I heard this big boom in the bottom, and the fire came off the bottom. So I started running behind my police car to take cover. I could feel the heat off it because it was windy like now. And then it gradually pulled up about 20, 30 feet and stayed there for a while, and then just took off.
His radio was dead. Zamora could only watch in awe as the object disappeared over the horizon. As soon as it was gone, the police radio crackled to life, and Zamora called for backup. A New Mexico State Police unit quickly arrived.
We came down here, and we saw this big rock right down here, and it was still on fire. And then we saw the imprints of the legs of the craft, and it was 4 of them. And then we saw this footprints around here.
By nightfall, the FBI had arrived on scene and began gathering evidence.
They went down there and measured the footprints and everything. And we stayed out here till about 7 or 8 o'clock at night, still wondering what it was. But they didn't say what it was or not. About 9 o'clock, they said we went down to the courthouse, and we talked about it until about midnight.
Instantly, Socorro was the center of an unprecedented media frenzy.
This is one of the few sightings that got national attention immediately. Lonnie Zamora's story is on the national news. It's in all the newspapers. Everybody's talking about it.
Kevin Randall is an internationally renowned UFO investigator. He feels the Socorro events stand alone because of the amount of physical evidence collected at the scene.
Landing gear marks were found. The bush was burned by the UFO engine. There were occupants, creatures from the craft sighted by Lonnie Zamora.
And the event brought the greatest UFO researcher of the day to Socorro.
J. Allen Hynek, the Air Force consultant, came to Socorro. He looked at it, talked to Zamora, talked to Zamora's superiors, talked to people who saw the landing traces, took photographs. So there's physical evidence remaining behind. It's one of the few times they said there could be a flying saucer.
I had conversations with Dr. Hynek about the Socorro case, and his comments to me led me to believe that he felt that this was one of those cases where the government was unwilling to permit him to say what he would like to say about it, and that dismayed him a great deal.
According to Timmerman, a longtime associate of J. Allen Hynek, the Socorro event was one of the defining moments in Hynek's career.
He felt that this was one of the most important cases he'd come across. And I think that maybe his attitude toward it was developed as a result of his feel about the Lonnie Zamora, the primary witness.
Lonnie Zamora is very credible. He's a police officer. He has nothing to gain by telling this story. He is stuck with this story from the very beginning. This is what he saw. There's no question that Lonnie Zamora saw something unusual on the ground.
According to the Air Force and government, they say they don't know what it was, and they never told me not to say or say about it, talk about it, but they say that they don't know what it was.
According to Timmerman, the Socorro event convinced Dr. Hynek that the truth about UFOs was being manipulated by the Air Force. After Socorro, Hynek left his post. The government lost one of its most prestigious spokespersons and gained its most ardent critic.
Dr. Hynek saw this, and it was very obvious to him that what Lonnie Zamora was saying in the depths of his honesty was not what the military was saying in their attempt to explain it.
So the original on-site evidence, so there's evidence of a UFO landing or some object landing. There were landing impressions that were left. There were supposed footprints, but we don't know whether Lonnie was actually mistaking them for footprints or human footprints. But and also the burning bush, which to touch was cold. So there's a lot of evidence in this one, and as I said, Allen Hynek was very impressed with this sighting, and said it was one of the best he'd ever come across as a Project Blue Book person. Okay, so basically the United States Air Force analysed the Socorro landing site. They said that there was no evidence, there was no evidence of markings of any sort in the area other than that of the shallow depressions, which were the 4 landing legs of that oval-shaped craft. Laboratory analysis of the soil samples disclosed no foreign material or radiation above normal background. Laboratory analysis of the burnt bush showed no chemicals or no propellant. That doesn't sound, I mean, that may sound, not what we would expect if something landed there, but then if the craft is actually not using conventional technology, well then it's not going to leave a propellant, is it? If it's anti-gravity or whatever. There are no evidence of no evidence presented of the object was extraterrestrial in origin. Well, obviously the Air Force would have said that, and what they did later on is blamed the lunar lander as landing on that spot. So this is statements by Alan Hynek and Hector Quintanilla. Let's have a quick look at this.
The incident was very interesting, to say the least. It seems to differ from practically all the earlier cases we investigated from one standpoint. The vehicle had left pod marks. There was an insignia observed by Lonnie Zamora on the side of the craft. The insignia was unidentifiable, not American nor Russian. And last of all, the observation of these two people in some sort of suit.
We went over the case completely. We had saw samples tested at the Air Materials Laboratory. The burnt bushes were analyzed for propellant residue. We measured the distances between the pod marks. My first reaction was that it was a lunar test module from NASA or the Air Force. That seemed to be the only logical explanation. This was probably the best documented case in the Air Force files, and I checked it out everywhere, all the way up to the top, even to the White House command post, and nothing.
According to the official status of the sighting of Lonnie Zamora, case carried as unidentified.
Okay, so...
According to the Air Force and government, they say they don't know what it was, and they never told me not to say or say about it, talk about it, but they say that they don't know what it was.
In fact, it took 21 years for the Air Force to finally offer an explanation for the Socorro UFO landing. They offered logs from the White Sands Missile Base, charting government testing of the newly developed lunar landing module. But the logs indicate the tests ended more than 5 hours before Zamora's sighting.
The Air Force explanation simply doesn't work because they have no documentation to place the lunar lander in that portion of New Mexico at that time. It does not match Zamora's description.
And according to JPL, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California, the lunar lander alluded to in the government data did not fly. It was dropped from a tower and had no system of independent propulsion as reported by Zamora.
So it's definitely not the lunar lander. If it can't fly and it's dropped off a crane, well then, according to Hector Quintanilla, that was his only explanation as to what it might have been, but it's not that, so it's something unknown. This is that drawing of the craft that was directed by, recreation of the craft directed by Lonnie Zamora, and you can see that insignia up there, and there was a little bit of controversy about that insignia because I think the police, and also under the direction of J. Alan Hynek, said do not release a diagram of this insignia, put a fake one there, just because if somebody else saw it, they could match it and say, no, that's not the insignia that I saw, it was like this. So, and were there other witnesses? Well, there was a young boy which was actually putting petrol in his father's car. Obviously the parents might have been inside, I don't know. But basically he overheard a conversation with another car that turned up in '64 at the petrol station, and they were discussing seeing a flying object fly over their car at about exactly the same, well, not exactly the same time, but very close to the time that it landed. So let's have a look at this. Okay, so he overheard the conversation between these two people when he was only 13, so it's a little bit dubious, but it could be true, I don't know. So there's a lot of paraphernalia about Lonnie Zamora when we got to Socorro. They've got posters of him up, murals up on streets and everywhere. And this is how we got there. So again, this wasn't that difficult to find. So if you're in Socorro, it's not far out of town.
Up ahead, the main road will go to the left, and South California Avenue will kind of stay straight, and we'll stay on that. And then everything just happened after that.
So he was pulled over here, and he saw a speeding car just go past.
I don't know if he's pulled over, but this is where he saw the speeding car.
This is where it all started, yeah.
Or maybe a little further up, but just kind of...
Yeah.
So the important thing is we'll come to a Y intersection and we'll
Yep.
take the right fork, and just after that is where it all happened.
Okay.
But again, I'm only going by her phone. I've
No
got
worries.
maps and things, but yep.
Right, thanks.
Okay, so we went down that to the right, and I did a Google Earth because this happened last year, and I thought, let me see whether I can actually find that correct spot where we turned, and then we went on to that gravel road. And I Google mapped it, and there it is there. So we've got a house on either side here, and you keep going down that road. I can't go any further because Google Maps doesn't go down that road, but you keep going down that road, and I've confirmed it. I've confirmed this is the actual site, this is the actual road, because in the Unsolved Mysteries documentary, this mountain is that mountain, because they actually got this actor to go to the exact site. So there's a perfect match between the mountains. And this is an aerial view, obviously, of, so we were about here near Raychester's of Socorro, and we were over here, turn left and then go down here, and then the crash site's sort of like around about here. So it's around about there, and there's a little bush there that I'll show you a photograph of. That's in my photograph, so it is the actual site, and this is us on the alleged crash site. I think it's this side here. So this is where we believe the saucer had landed in the Lonnie Zamora Incident in 1964. Just over here, there's a bit of a clearing. Very difficult to know where it is. We've got a hill up here where he was standing. We've got a hill up here, and then there's this depression here, and we believe it might have been somewhere around here. It's not marked. Very difficult to know exactly the location. There's two flat parts here where the soil's nice and flat. There should have been some rocks, some alien footprints. The vehicle would have landed here and then just taken off above over that bush over there. We have got the right area. Sometimes these sites are a bit difficult to find because there's rumours that it was occurred in a different area of Socorro, but this is definitely the right site. So we've got the landing site here, alleged landing site, and this is the it's like the westernmost end of where the craft had landed, with salt bush burning here, a few rocks and some alien footprints here. The craft was an oval-shaped craft with an insignia on it, and this is probably the most likely area it had landed. Oops. So there I am near a greasewood plant. A view of the landing site. They used to have those rocks around the impressions, but they would have washed out. You know, it was the last talk on Aurora, Texas. So I went to Dallas to do the MUFON conference in 3 weeks after this tour. So I came back after that massive tour that we did of the United States, and then 3 weeks later I thought, God, I've got to go back to the United States to do this conference. So I did, and as I said before, I went to, after the conference I met this guy called Daniel Allen Jones, this guy on the end, the young guy, and he's a semi-expert, I shouldn't say semi-expert, he's an expert on Aurora. He worked with Jim Mars. Anyone heard of Jim Mars? He's deceased now, yeah. He worked with Jim Mars on that. And this is Melinda Leslie, which a lot of you will probably know, this lady here. I met her in Sedona, New Mexico, and she took us out to a viewing during the night with infrared goggles, infrared binoculars, and we saw UAPs coming out of hills, and that was really interesting. And these are other friends that I met at the conference. So how do we know that there was a windlass there? Is because when MUFON did their investigation, they actually were allowed to take the structure off, that little housing for the well off. You can see the bulldozer there, and then they looked in the well, and they found the footings of the windlass there, so that definitely was there. And there's the actual cemetery that the being was buried in, allegedly. And we went into the cemetery, and there's a little plaque there that says, the site is also well known because the legend that a spaceship crashed nearby in 1897 and the pilot killed in the crash was buried here. So we saw that that's in here. There's other information there, but and there's the actual cemetery inside, and this is roughly where the body was buried here, around about here. There's Melinda and Daniel, and we've got these markers here. So there used to be gravestones there, but they were probably taken by someone, and then the actual entity is sort of like buried, I think, yes, maybe around about here where she's standing. And so that's the old oak tree. So they refer to the old oak tree. It's still there after, since 1897. It's a very old tree, and someone's put a little alien there to just mark that this is the oak tree. That it's. Yeah. So that's it. Any questions?